Welcome to the podcast, Sarah. This is going to be an amazing conversation because we're talking about something I love doing that not enough people do.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So, we were just having this conversation, and you are a fellow producer and
Yes.
podcaster. And you had told me this really great story of how you got into supporting people on not only the production side, but the guesting side. Like, we got to know the story because it was like one of those that like I needed to hear that.
Yeah, so I've been on the production side and just like behind the scenes for about 4 years. Where at the podcast that I produce is on season 5, and I've seen the best and the worst of podcast guests, and the ones that make you really excited and happy about what you're doing, and then the ones that not so much and make you have to reconfigure your schedule to not release that episode. And I was always really interested in like how people can learn how to do podcast guesting and how they can do it really well. And then I have a friend of mine who hosted a podcast that was a business podcast. It was all interview based. And he pod faded after years of doing this show just because of how transactional it became. And every episode, he would bring on a guest, and that guest had no interest in getting to know him. There was no follow up later about, like, we love the show, we're leaving reviews, like, let's get to know each other, like, let's continue this relationship. It was just, I'm going to use this as 30 minutes of ad space. And thanks for your time. Bye. And that's not fulfilling for anybody. Like, that's not something that's going to keep you passionate about what you're doing and what you're creating. And he ended up pod fading after all of these years just because it didn't make him happy anymore. It made him feel dirty and used. And now my goal as like a podcast guest coach is to help people not do that. Help people focus on forging those relationships and telling their stories and building those connections so that they can actually have like a very positive experience for themselves, for the host, and for the listener, and do it in a way that still manages to grow their business.
Yeah. What a good point. Because, and again, I will raise my hand. I fell victim to this even as somebody on the host side, where it was like, okay, well, the interview's over. And then I was like, ah, oh, no. What if I found their address and send them an actual like snail mail card? Because I noticed that the people that I just disappeared from, I was like, I never saw a return, which was one of the things, but I also didn't create that connection. Like, it may not have grown my business, but I met another human.
Yeah. Growing a network is like so important, and it's going to lead to growing your business. And I mean, I have like just on my wall right now cards that people have sent as thank yous for having them on our podcast. But I've even been asked, like, what is the best way to thank a podcast host for having me on their show? The best way is just to be their friend and be their fan and continue to engage with them. Like, you're not the only episode that they've released, so share another episode, listen to their show, recommend it to people, just interact with them online and help spread the word of this show. Like, yes, we all love mugs. If you want to send me a mug, I will not say no, but we'd rather have reviews and connections and all of that. And like, if you want to be a really great guest, it doesn't stop when you stop recording. Like, continue to just build that connection and build that relationship. Like, these people are people, they're not just robots. This is not AI, surprisingly. We're real. um, so just continuing to like forge that relationship and build that circle is going to have more of an effect than you think it will.
Oh yeah, and that right there, we're not AI, we are people, we are humans, and forging that connection. I know that you mentioned like there are some episodes that people come on and we're like, "Oh, we're sorry, it didn't record." Like the audio was too bad to release. So maybe some of those connections you get to know each other and you let them go. But there is so much power in this platform And being a guest expert on a podcast versus anything else, a dual live, a summit, whatever. I think there's something special about podcasting. Do you agree?
I do. I think podcasting is a very, very unique media, and it's one that is built solely on connection and community. And you don't get that in other things. You don't get that on TV. You don't get that at a, like, you get it kind of at a conference, depending on how good the conference makes it. But podcasting is different. And you can even see it just like in the ROI of, I mean, I'm going to get super nerdy on you, but podcast marketing has like the highest ROI and like the highest conversion rates because people trust the hosts. And it all comes down to that trust. If you trust the host and you trust what they're presenting to you, they're going to accept that product and be willing to try it more so than anyone else. And when you guest on a podcast, you get to kind of feed off of the host, the trust that they have in the host, because this person is telling you, like, I like this person, I like what this person has to say, and I think you guys will like it too. So you really get to just kind of capitalize on that trust, and then you use the time that you're on the show to build your own trust by really bringing value and bringing messages and stories and not bringing a sales pitch.
Yeah. And I think that, like, to like further that, it's a space where I allow people in that do exactly the same thing as me. It's the only place that I've never felt like it's a competition. It's like a, hey, I have a space. I might not be for everybody. You do the exact same thing. You have your own unique spin on it. Bring it here.
Definitely. I mean, this is such an industry of just collaboration over competition. And that's it's something I'm trying to implement everywhere in my life, just because of how valuable I have found it just in this industry. But I've been the same way. I had someone reach out to me who also helps people guest on podcasts, and he reached out to me specifically not to be like, "Hey, I do this too. Like, let's see who's better," or like, "I'm going to steal your clients." He was, "Let's see where we're missing." Like pieces and where we can fill in for each other. So is there something that you offer that I don't? Is there something I offer that you don't? How can we partner to offer a more complete product? And that's amazing to me. Like, I come from the finance world where it's usually so much about competition. And thankfully, I come from a company that is not like that and we're like actually respectful and collaborative, but it's so much the norm in so many industries that having people who their first reaction is, how can I help you, is just amazing. It's why I've committed to staying within this space for so long.
Yeah. Oh, and it is, and it's a partnership, and it's not just host to host. And I think that that's one of the things, like when I went through some of your, like a little bit of research before we met and just having this conversation is with the guest, it's still a partnership. Like
Mm-hmm.
as a host, you're putting in a lot of work. And if you can create that friendship, that partnership, that connection, that network. So as a guest, because again, I'm a host, I have screwed up enough interviews to know that this is probably the next area that I need to get support with. But as a guest, what can we do to create that partnership? Because not every guest is a host.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, I mean, part of it is practice, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. But there are definitely some kind of best practices that everyone should try to follow when they're going to guest on a podcast. And first, it's really understanding what your story is. I think when you go into a podcast ready with stories and ready with things that can forge connections, that's going to be a lot more engaging of content than, oh, I'm an expert in this. I got kind of got my start in podcasting being on the mic. The first podcast that I guested on was Stacking Benjamins, which in the finance space is like as big as you can get. It is an amazing show. And I got myself on that show on accident because I was trying to pitch the host of my finance show. And Joe Saul-Sehy stops me and he says, I'm not looking for an expert. I'm looking for someone with a cool story. And I think I had a stroke because the next thing that I said was, "Do you want to hear the story about when I got a tattoo of a penis on my arm while I was in Ireland?" And he did. And that was the story he brought me on his show to tell. And I didn't think that was a story that would be impactful, but it impacted the rest of my career. So being vulnerable and being open and honest and telling those stories and letting people kind of see who you are, not just what you do. I think that is something that any podcast guest should do, because it's just the point of a podcast. The point of a podcast is to get to know somebody, and to have those connections. So that's really my number one tip, is just always lead with stories, but lead with a story that can tie some value in as well, if that makes
So I got to
sense.
know, how did the penis story tie into the finance podcast? Because I'm like, okay, first off, I need to know the story, but second off, like, I want to know how this tied in, because this is something that's so important, is understanding how stories can tie into something. Like, these are two very separate things, yet you made them tie
Yes.
together. That's a
So
superpower.
yeah. It didn't tie in specifically to finance. I was on a special episode that kind of went into, it's called like a potpourri episode, where it's more like outside of the finance space. But the idea was that I was in kind of a dead end. I was in a bad relationship. I was in a job that wasn't going anywhere. And taking myself to Ireland on a solo trip got me out of that headspace. And it really showed me that I could do things on my own. It led to me quitting my job and moving to Texas and ending up taking a position that changed my life. And it just gave me the courage to make changes and go after what I wanted versus just kind of accepting what I had. And I wouldn't have had that if I didn't accidentally get a tattoo of a penis. It's my constant reminder that I can do things that scare me, and even if it's embarrassing, it's going to be okay. It's going to lead to something great.
Oh, I love that, and it's so relatable. We all have that one thing, whether it's a tattoo or it's a memory or it's a I hope nobody found ever finds out about the story, that I think
Yeah.
is what needs to be shared when you're a guest. I always try to look and find like the little things, because, like, I didn't find anywhere on your stuff about this penis tattoo,
Oh, it's in my
but
blog.
this is I didn't get that far. We'll put it that way. I didn't find it in like my research of like the time that I spent, but I think that that's interesting because it opened up a space for you. You stood in your authentic power and said, "Hey, guess what? I did this. I got this thing. It's awkward, but it's cool and it's a conversation starter."
It is definitely a conversation starter. It's been covered up since, by the way. It's an airplane now, but it wasn't for the longest time. And that the reason too that I like to tell that story is not only because it's super authentic, it's the real me. It's I'm not perfect. We all make mistakes. But it's also when people talk about like going on a podcast and telling your story, it kind of paints this picture that that story needs to be something like tragic or traumatic or dramatic or sensational, like something that would make headlines. It doesn't. It just has to be true, and it just has to be unique to you and highlight an experience that taught you something. And then that whatever that taught you, that's the value that you're bringing through that story. So, as long as it has some effect on you or someone that could hear it, even if that effect is just making them laugh on a bad day, like when I say I got a tattoo of a penis on accident, like that is valuable. So, when people think about what that story is that they can tell, they don't have to have a newsworthy story. They just have to have something that can connect them to somebody else.
Oh, I'm like, there's a mic drop right there. I'm like, be able to connect with somebody else. And again, that's part of the I see the reason of pod fade is the numbers. We always think of it, it's got to connect to many. It's got to connect to many. But what about that one person that was having that really crummy day, that story, like, or the person that's listening right now that's like, how did you do that on accident? Like, like all the things, because I have all those questions. Like, you have told a story, you left me wanting more because I want more. And it's like, it did perk me up. It's like, okay, well, I've done some dumb things. I've got some interesting tattoos on different parts of my body for random reasons. It wasn't an accident, but I purposely put them there. But
You're better than
I
me.
love how simple it can be to connect.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think having those experiences of either being in a new place or being surrounded by new people, not really knowing what you're doing, like all of those little things that we experience regularly, those are things that in the moment we're like, this is me, like I'm going through this alone. But when you step back, you realize like everybody is going through the same thing at some point in their life. And it always like it goes into like existential crisis when I think about how every single person you cross on the street is living their own life, and everything that you go through and all the complexities like is happening billions of times. And that is just ridiculous to me. I can't understand it. It's like astrophysics. But when you think about that, like how many things can you possibly go through that nobody else has experienced before? Like the chances are so low. So when you tell these stories, even if they might seem small to you, someone else can relate to it. And that is how you forge that connection.
So is that something that someone that's wanting to guest and be a good guest, they need to find that little story, or do you have different stories for different hosts? Like, is that your signature story when you show up in all podcasts that you guest on, or is it kind of, this person might appreciate this a little bit more?
So it's become my signature story only because I'm known for it at this point. So even if I try not to tell it, the host is like, no, 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 that's not the story we want. But when it comes to what I would tell somebody, I definitely think it's kind of like when you send the same cover letter to every job interview. Like they're not, no, that's not how this fit. Like that's not how it fits. Um, so when I work with clients who want to guest on podcasts, we really work on kind of a personal brand and how we can tie different stories into that brand. And I think the most important thing is to determine what value you're trying to bring on whatever show it is that you're talking about. So you don't have to have just one message and only go for shows within that message. You can reach out to different shows in different areas if you have value you can bring, and then pick a story that relates to that. So the story that related here was more so about my friend who pod faded because of the bad guests. That's the one I led with because that's the one that really fits. And that's the first time I've told that story on a podcast. I think. Don't quote me on it. But that's not the story that really shows me. So anytime that someone asks more personal, more about like my journey, that I go towards the tattoo story just because it really kind of sums things up in a weird way. So don't feel like you have to have that one story. Just have the stories that connect with your message, because that's the way that you bring kind of the entertainment and the value and time together.
Oh, entertainment and value. Like, yes, please. Like,
I think they
yes,
call it like, what is
please.
it, edutainment?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. If you can educate and entertain at the same time, that is a gift that everyone should work on.
Yes, and there's a lot of people trying to do it and not doing it great, but keep trying. We believe in you.
Yes, we're here for it. But
Personal growth.
right. I truly like, it's so cool that you mentioned that, like, that's possibly the first time that you shared that story, because it is a story. That's the story that's connecting with this audience. It's getting to know the host. It is not blanket pitching these templates. That's a whole nother tangent. And you're welcome to go down it because you are an expert. But as a host, if you blanket template me, I will write back to you. But you may not like what I have to say.
Yeah. I have pitched either myself or my host to shows in the most outrageous ways. And I get asked, because I help people with guesting, I get asked if I also book them on shows. And I say no, because I'm one person and I don't have the bandwidth to personalize and like do all of this back research that is required to make a good pitch. But I will give them kind of outlines and best practices so they could do it themselves and connect them with resources. But I don't do it myself. But I do it for my hosts and I do it for myself. And I mean, I got on Stacking Benjamins because I told him an embarrassing story. I got my host on Entrepreneurs on Fire because I stood up during his keynote in the question section and said, "Can we be on your podcast?" And apparently, fortune favors the bold was his response. And I got Eric on that show. So the ways that you pitch, it does not have to be the standard, like, "Dear host, I am writing to ask if I could come on your show to talk about this." Like, be creative. Like, I'm a host. Well, not a, I'm sorry, I'm a producer and I get these emails every day and I don't read all of them because they're canned and they're boring. But there are ways you could pitch a show that show your personality right away, and just you open up with, "Hi, I would be a really great guest because here's my personality just coming at you." And I've had people come up to me after and be like, "I can't believe you did that." And my only response is, "I can't believe it worked." But realistically, the worst they could say is no. So why not? Just don't be generic. Generic is boring.
Oh, don't be boring. Yes.
We don't like
I'm like,
boring.
no, nobody wants boring. And, like from the host perspective, if I can tease something out that hasn't been shared, that's where I get excited. Like, it excites me to know that your business came out of serving someone who was pod fading. I'm like, cure for pod fade? Hello. That's why you started your business.
Yeah. And he knows I mean, at this point, he's one of my closest friends, and he knows that he was part of the inspiration for what I ended up launching. And it hasn't been announced yet. So it's still a secret, but he and I are about to launch a show together, because he's like, "I pod faded from that show, but I can't not have a show. So let's do something together." So we'll be launching sometime, I want to say in June.
Oh, well, you'll have to keep us posted and we'll definitely update the
Absolutely.
show notes and everything. Or hey, come back for as a guest the second time and talk about
Please.
launching your own co-hosted show because we've never had anybody come talk about co-hosting.
Yeah,
Because I
I
think
would love
there's
to.
great and I'm sure there's both sides because I've never done it. But coming back to like using your voice, using your story, showing up, being unique, to start out with something weird. I still am like my whole brain is still like, you stood up at a conference and like, hey, I don't have a question, but come be on the show. I'm like,
Yeah, it
that's
was John Lee
awesome.
Dumas, who is like the godfather of podcasting. And his whole not the whole presentation, but a lot of it was talking about how to pitch to be on a show. And he walked you through, like, this is what, if you were to pitch me this would get you on the show. So when he opened it up for questions, I was like, "Can we be on your show?" And he wasn't expecting it, and he was on the spot, and he was like, "Send me a pitch and let me know it was you." And I followed his script to a T. When I sent him the pitch, I asked him right after what you would like someone to talk about on your show. So I knew exactly what to pitch. And I just followed his script. And I think I even put a note saying, like, "Does this sound familiar?" And, but I did exactly what he wanted. And I was memorable. And now I run into him all the time at these conferences, and every time I'm like, "Has anyone else done it?" He's like, "Nope, no one else will ever do it and it'll never work again." but it worked the first time. The worst
Oh,
he could have
I
said was no and embarrass me in front of an entire conference. It's fine.
would it be you or him by saying like no? It's like you just had the courage to do exactly what he said. You're like, I'm doing what you're saying.
Exactly. No, he was very kind and gracious about it, and it makes for a great story.
Yeah, and it does. It's again, it's just like the take the chance, take the
Mm-hmm.
chance on the business, like the business that you didn't know was going to happen because of your friend's pod fade. You know, the ability to get on a big show without having to go jump through the hoops and pay the big bucks to get on there. Like you did the not outside the box, the fun, the I'm going to stand up, I'm going to use my voice, I'm going to be unique in myself. And I think that that's one of the things that's missing in this space.
Yeah, I think the power of authenticity is just so it's so important, and it's kind of people are afraid of it, and people are afraid to be authentic. And when I built my company, I did it after spending so many years in finance trying to fit myself into the box of finance professional, and that's just not the box I fit in. And I still do financial marketing, and I still am on that side, but I'm able to take a step back onto my own side and just really be myself. And like you've seen my website, you've seen how much personality is in it, and like I feel like you can go on my site and feel like you know me because I was so committed to being authentic. And I shouldn't tell you, but I did launch a podcast that I pod faded within 2 weeks. But it was like almost like a daily journal for me, because I struggle very badly with anxiety. And for 2 weeks, it was 10 days, 10 episodes. I had a podcast called Why Am I Anxious Today? That I would just share whatever reason I had for being anxious that day, whether it was real, like a this makes sense, this would make anyone anxious, or something completely ridiculous, like a flashback to seventh grade. Um, but I did that just because if people aren't talking about it from non like a medical lens, but like actual like these are people that are dealing with it, it can be hard to see it in the space. And it's just me. Like I am not me without having anxiety. I'm just an anxious person. So being able to do that and have those conversations was just more ways of me to just be myself. And didn't it was a lot of work to do a daily podcast. So I did pod fade. Don't hate me, but it was fun while it lasted.
And I don't think that there's bad for podcasts. I think podcasts serve. Like I have one podcast that my voice is disguised. I don't tell people I have it, and I talk about all the things that I don't want to get into arguments about in the real world. And it was like that podcast was a healing tool for you.
Mhm.
So I never want to shun people that are like, I had a season of a podcast. Like, what I want to say is like, use that to empower your voice. If that's for a
Mhm.
season, great. Let it be for a season. But if you're pod fading out because you've gotten yourself stuck and you're not guesting, you're not growing, you're not using your voice, you've changed your tone because you're afraid of what people think, those are the people that this like those pod faders are the ones we want to like let's bring you back to yourself.
Yeah. And I think people are also, I mean, along with being afraid to be authentic, they can be afraid to change and to grow. So someone like it's not pod fading if you rebrand your podcast or if you relaunch with a different name or a different topic. Like you what you decide you want to talk about 1 year, it might change later, and it would create a better show if you were to lean into that change than if you were to just kind of try to force yourself to stay on that topic. So you can continue to create and continue to be a podcaster, but doing it under a different show name, like that's fine. You're still creating, you're still doing what you love. It's okay to change. It's okay to grow. So,
Oh, I mean, then that's a permission slip that every one of us should take for sure. So I want to bring it back to guesting because this is where your superpower lies, is helping people like show up authentically, to like maybe shed the shoulds, like as you, I think you said something like outside, like I
Use your
definitely have a
outside voice.
I have an inside voice and I have an outside voice, and sometimes I get confused if I'm inside or outside. But like in your mind, like that was something that like when I first opened your website, I was like something about outside voice. I got so sick of hearing that, like, use your inside voice, Jen. Use your inside voice. There has to be a story about why that's part of like it was impactful. That's something I remembered right when I opened. There's like, okay, why use your outside voice?
See, I love that question because I've never been asked that before. And it's kind of weird that it is the headline of my website is it's time to use your outside voice and no one's ever asked me why. And I mean there's a few reasons. I mean, I feel like your outside voice is kind of just that authenticity piece. Like your inside voice is like when you're kind of quiet and pretending and just kind of sticking to the script and staying in that box. But your outside voice is really just like breaking out of that box and using your true voice. But then the same, it's just, we're always told use your outside voice, use your inside voice, use your inside voice. And I've heard people say that even when they're outside, like, but this is what the outside voice is for. We're outside, and I don't know. I just have this whole like I'm constantly drawn to being outdoors. I don't like to be inside. I don't like to be stifled. I don't like to be quiet. And I think we are our true selves when we are loud and we are passionate and we are, for me, outside. So that's probably not a great answer, but that's the one that I've got. You're the first person to ever ask me that. But I definitely think it's time everyone uses their outside voice and just really embraces who they are in an authentic way.
Oh, and I love that you've paired that with guesting on a podcast, because if you even like, I mean, I'm not quite using my outside voice because nobody would appreciate that on the microphone. Like I'm amplifying my voice. Like when I saw that, I'm like, yes, outside voice, amplifying our voice, leaving an impact with our voice without being in like the corner, like be a good girl, go sit in the corner, be quiet. Like, no, it's time to be seen and heard for your
Yeah.
authentic story.
Yeah, one of the reasons that I wanted to get into this space was a lot of people understand that podcast guesting can be good for branding and good for marketing. So they just decide to do it, which is fine. I mean, everyone I think should try it. It's a lot of fun. And if you have a message, share it. So getting on those podcasts is entering yourself into these global conversations. So that is a way of just using that outside voice because you're getting outside of your own world, outside of your own bubble, and into other people's communities. But you also have to do it in a way that is respectful and is interesting and is fun and is like content first. And it's a really great way to spread a message. You just have to really understand what the message is that you want to spread and the best way to spread it. But you can't do that without using your outside voice.
So true. You have to show up authentically and be willing to be weird and loud and share your penis tattoo story and talk about the things that nobody's brought up before and be caught off guard and be okay with every moment.
Absolutely.
So, like, tell us a little bit more about like where can we find you? How does your business support people? Who is the ideal person to come in that's like, where are they at in their journey that would be a good fit for you?
Yeah, so you can find me at my company's called Favorite Daughter Media. So it's favoritedaughtermedia.com. And I work with anybody who is trying to spread a message, whether it's a personal brand or an entrepreneur, a small business, a startup, whatever it is, but somebody that's trying to spread a message that is really mission driven and is really trying to do something good. I'm picky about who I want to work with, and I don't want to work with people that aren't spreading positivity, just because that's this is very focused on amplifying voices, and I do not want to amplify negativity. Um, So I work with people one-on-one or in group settings and take them through. I have like a 4-step process for being a really great guest. And we talk about how to set our goals and how to really nail down what our stories are, how to turn podcasts into lead generation through lead magnets and sales funnels, and how to set those up. All of the technical stuff, all of the fun stuff, and the creative side of it. And I also work with people on creating those things for them. So designing lead magnets and writing email sales funnels and all the stuff that is less fun that I do for you so you don't have to. But yeah, all information about that is on my website. And I'm happy to work with anybody who wants to say nice things.
And that's who we are here, is because we're the tsunami makers. So, my
Yes.
tribe is pretty much the people that are on a mission to make a change in the world for the better, to spread a voice of happiness and joy
Yes.
and passion and all of those things. So I love that this is what you're doing. And I have to know, are you the favorite daughter?
Um, if you, it depends who you ask. I think so. It's funny. One of the first, when I was building my website and I didn't really have testimonials because I was brand new, the first testimonial on my website is, I never said you were the favorite, Sarah's mom. And I now have testimonials and they're very nice, but that one will never leave my website. That is the truest one I have.
And I think it speaks to who you are and why you're supporting people sharing their outside voices. Like, no, I'm going to own this. I'm going to stand up at the conference. I'm still like on that. Like, I'm going to stand up at the JLD conference and I'm going to ask him to be on his show, because why not? Like, what's he going to say? No. And I love that you are helping people step into that true power, because it is such a powerful, powerful platform.
It is, and it's something that I love, and I love talking about it. But if anybody wants a free gift, I did bring free gifts, if that's
Oh, we
okay.
always we like free gifts.
Um, like I said, one of the things that I do help people do is create a lead magnet. So if you want to use podcast guesting or podcasting to grow a business, lead magnets are great ways to do that. I put together an ebook with 50 of my favorite lead magnet ideas, and you can download it for free at favoriteleadmagnets.com, or just go to my website and it's in the main nav. It says free ebook.
And I think that everyone needs that, because that's one thing that I don't hear often. And my other show, I think I've done 210 interviews now. And I have probably had maybe 10 people out of those send someone to a lead magnet instead of like social media.
It is so important. It's one of the like main tenets of what I teach people, like how to do it and why. And it's the it's the best way. We've my host, when he started going on podcasts, we had one, he ended up on Bigger Pockets Money, which is a huge finance show, and he sent people to a specific lead magnet, and our mailing list grew by thousands in like a week, and we're still getting clients from that. And it's just such a powerful way to grow a business, because it's just continuing this conversation. So if anyone enjoyed listening to me and wants to continue this conversation, just take it offline and go to my website, download that ebook, get some more content, more value, and I will send you one single email. That is all. Um, and just letting you know I'm here if you need me. So lead magnets are great. Don't be afraid of them.
Oh, oh. So I've got to know, like, what ingredients do you want to add to the cure for pod fade?
I want to add, has anyone added collaboration yet?
I don't think so. The community,
Okay.
but not collaboration.
Collaboration. If you are forgetting why you started it, go guest on someone else's show. Go collaborate with another creator. Um, if anyone hasn't yet read the book Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon, go read that. It's an amazing tool for anybody who wants to do anything creative, and just start finding more inspiration and find it from the people that are creating things just like you.